culture, and the quirkier side of life. The Todd Starnes Commentary.
Apparently, there's no one available to hoe Mrs. Obama's garden. The team of taxpayer-funded gardeners who tend her turnips has been furloughed. The website Obama Foodorama provides in-depth coverage of the first family's vegetables, and they report the much-touted garden is in a state of disrepair. Tomatoes are rotting on the ground, squirrels are gorging themselves on collards, and weeds are sprouting up everywhere. Under government rules, National Park Service gardeners are not allowed to rake or weed or even mow the grass. It must be something of a shock to discover Mrs. Obama does not prune her kumquats, but it's true. The first family prefers to enjoy the fruits of other people's work, but I'm a little surprised the president doesn't spread around some fertilizer. It's the least he could do, and he does it so well. I'm Todd Starnes.
Thank you, Todd Starnes. Always appreciate it. Welcome back. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk. And we continue our interview with David FREDDOSO. He is the Washington Examiner columnist, and he is the editor of the Conservative Intelligence Briefing, as well as the New York Times best-selling author 3 times, by the way, and one of those books, The Case Against Barack Obama, just to name one in there. And David, before the break, we were getting to a point where you said, in essence, the last, I will say now 30, 35 minutes, things have really broken down when it comes to the CR and the debt ceiling, specifically the debt ceiling and the raising of the debt ceiling. You talked about selective default, which would include the idea of choosing to default on the debt, not prioritization, but choosing to default on the debt. And we talked about the people who they said, no way, you're not going to default. It's impossible to default. We've taken 20 times more, so everything's going to be all right. And so don't worry, we'll cover the interest on that. We'll have enough money for Social Security. We'll be able to do it. And you've said, hey, not immediately. Things immediately won't get real bad immediately, but we're going to have some serious issues. And It's going to hit. And it's not going to be like the government shutdown, right?
Right. Or you can think of it, there are 2 options in that situation. You have 2 different categories of expenses, right? You've got debt service, which is where typically the government borrows sells bonds to cover the old bonds when they come due. And then you've got everything else that the government does, which includes, the biggest components of which are going to be the entitlements. The problem here is that the other option, the one option is to default. The other option is to cut back on that stuff by, depending on what kind of revenues are coming in this month. And you have to remember the government's going to be living hand to mouth here. So depending on what's coming in this month, you're going to have to cut a certain amount. And again, the entitlements and the veterans benefits and all of those things are not going to be unharmed if that happens. There's just no way that you can prevent, there's no way you can avoid cutting back there if you end up cutting spending that heavily. And the other problem, though, is just that, bonds don't come due just whenever. These bond auctions take place typically on specific days for specific maturities. So if 10 years ago today they sold a bunch of 10-year bonds, a bunch of people are showing up today to redeem them. And as it happens, we're going to have, I believe it's $440 billion in treasuries that are coming due between now and November. Actually, it's a month and a half, now and the end of November, I think. And there's no guarantee that you're really going to end up in a situation where you're not even going to have this little game of shutting down parks and sending out more park police than you usually have when that happens. I mean, you're just literally not going to be paying people, and you're not going to be paying Social Security. And we have this, minor 17% government shutdown. Most of the functions nobody notices or really needs have been shut down. But if you do a 90% government shutdown, which is probably what we'd need to avoid defaulting on the debt, then a lot of people are going to start noticing that, and it's not going to be pretty.
David, President Obama knew this ostensibly the House Republicans and the Republicans knew this, and the calculation was made. You all will get the blame, so I'm going to push it. What incentive does President Obama have to give the Republicans anything at this juncture?
Well, really not much. I mean, I'm sure that he doesn't want to be the president, the first president of the United States, to default on our debt. It's never happened in our history. It's actually forbidden by our Constitution. That was one of the big debates around the time of the American Revolution was, do we honor the debts that we incurred? Now that we're a new country, do we have to do that? And the answer was yes, that every penny we borrowed, we're going to pay back. And they always honored the debts. That's the incentive. It only goes so far. Nobody wants this to happen. Obama doesn't want it to happen. The Republicans don't want it to happen. But if the incentive, at least as far as dragging this crisis out, I believe is all on Obama's and the Democrats' side. That the longer it goes on, the more politically it benefits them. Which is not to say that they're trying to drag it out, but they certainly are not the ones who are going to be begging, please, don't let this happen, don't let this happen. I think the Republicans have a lot more to lose here, and that, so far in this thing, it hasn't actually gone as badly as I thought, but the polling definitely shows Republicans are getting the worst end of this, with everybody hurting some.
Okay, and again, I don't mean to belabor this point, but the idea of selective default, that's what it would be, because you could cover the interest, and so technically you wouldn't be in default. But you're talking about paying the other bills. You might reach a
point where you can't cover the interest. But again, the idea of selective default really is that if our government simply decided to and raised the debt ceiling, we could service the debt. So, it's not that we're an impoverished country with literally nothing that we can't service our debt. We'd be in selective default because we'd be the guy who gets the credit card bill and says, I'm not paying that. Basically, that's the way creditors would look at our government if we went into selective default, as opposed to the person who simply can't afford to make the payment.
Right. And so either way, what you're going to do is send a signal to the markets as well as other countries investing in us. Hey, we're really shaky, and it's unpredictable, and it seems to me
that might not be as bad as if we didn't have the means. But you're going to see bond investors start demanding much higher interest rates. You're going to see, to compensate for the greater risk that they perceive, which means that you're going to see other interest rates rise as well. You're going to see the value of the dollar fall. Because dollar-denominated bonds are going to be worth less to investors if they sell them to each other. You're going to, basically, you're going to see a lot of things about our lifestyle change. It would hurt a lot. I mean, it's not a joke. Default is, it's pretty serious stuff, and all of your assets, your home, all of those things are going to go down in value with interest rates going up, and with the dollar going down. You're going to see a lot of really negative consequences. That it might be a lot like a repeat of what happened in 2008, and maybe somewhat worse.
Now, David, again, and I have to keep hitting this because using default, as Rand Paul said, look, we pull in 20 times what the debt service is. So if we're covering the service on the debt, again, right. You're saying
just to be clear though, that's over the course of a whole year, right? Most people pay their taxes in April. The government takes that money in and it starts spending it throughout the year. And some people file their taxes at other times. Some people get extensions. They file their taxes in October. Businesses file quarterly. They make quarterly estimated payments on their taxes, et cetera, and that's how the money is coming into the government now. Well, everything that came in April, you could say we've spent that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's whatever's trickling in right now is what the government has to live on once we reach the debt limit. So if it's basically a cash flow problem. If we could only wait till next April, we might be okay. But since we can't, because we have to make payments right now between now and the end of November, and it's a very large number. And like I said, I believe it's $440 billion. I saw that at Zero Hedge. If we have to make $440 billion in payments now, and we're going to be bringing in, we could end up a bit short. That's the thing. You're playing with fire here because you just don't know. It's not the sort of way. Obviously, nothing that the government does to run its finances, you would never want to replicate that in your family's finances.
We can't.
Obviously,
we can't print the money.
Wouldn't want to take this.
Yeah.
Sorry?
We can't print money, so we can't do that.
Right.
Okay. No, and I appreciate the points, and I appreciate the perspective. Tell me this, David. Barack Obama, how do you win a negotiation with President Obama? It seems that, especially in light of the fact that you have that split with the Republican Party, that it's next to impossible.
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, this is what people are discussing now, is that can you pass something in the House that doesn't cost John Boehner his speakership that the Senate will actually vote for and Obama will actually sign? And we've reached an impasse because there's a lot of pressure on House Republicans to, again, going back to this all goes back to the choice of the defund strategy. I think they probably could have hammered out a deal that would have been better than what was proposed today if the Republicans had started from a reasonable asking point. This is a lot like when you go to get a job and you want them to give you $50,000 a year, and so, you ask for a higher number hoping you'll get what you want. So you say 60. But if you say $10 million a year, the boss is going to tell you, hey, there's the door. Well,
okay.
That's what the Republicans did here. They want Obamacare gone, and if it doesn't disappear, then we're not going to fund anything. And it's not really. I mean, Obama has not been blameless here. He's been quite intransigent and not really willing to do anything. But when you start with an ask like that and you maintain it under pressure from, conservative groups that I love, and unfortunately, we wasted a lot of the time that would have gone into negotiating something realistic.
Okay, but what about
simply insisting?
What about the fact that we passed the bills in the House when it comes to the CR, that we're funding all of government, but not Obamacare? And what we were looking for is making the case, as Jon Stewart was able to ask Kathleen Sebelius a question that oftentimes the mainstream media is unable to ask. And it's the simple. I mean, I thought the strategy was going the right way, especially when Senator Manchin chimed in. Granted, purple state, I get it. But the point is, as I look at it, that was completely reasonable. Suspend the individual mandate for a year. I mean... Yeah, no, and it would be a much easier case to make now if we weren't where we were. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we are where we are. And just to clarify, as far as the whole business of not funding Obamacare, we actually, Obamacare does not depend on any of the bills and any other bill passing. It actually has its own sources of funding. So that was one of the main shortcomings in the strategy of defunding Obamacare. If we shut the government down from now until, let's just assume the debt limit isn't a problem, we pass it or something, and we keep the government shut down through next November, Obamacare continues to be funded. So there is no defunding Obamacare by just passing all the other parts of government. And, again, this is something that I think led a misunderstanding that I think led a lot of people to think, oh, well, we can just pass the whole rest of the government, right? Well, no, what they had to do is they passed the rest of the government on the condition that you take all the money, the separate money, away from Obamacare. Well, what that means is you don't actually have leverage against Obamacare when you shut the government down. Obamacare is up and running. It's a disaster, of course. Mm-hmm. And, I like to joke with people that even if we reopen the government, that Obamacare will still be shut down. But there was no chance of shutting down Obamacare through this strategy, and I think a lot of people didn't understand that. It's a procedural fine point, but no, I appreciate it and appreciate your perspective. Hey, thank you for taking the time tonight, and people can learn more about this as you are writing with the conservative and intelligence briefing, if I'm not mistaken, right? Washington Examiner. That's where we can
right.
Find you? Great.
And I'd also recommend my column this week in the Examiner is about this issue.
Gotcha.
And Yeah.
Thank you, David FREDDOSO. Pleasure. We're just out of time. AFR Talk.